Which wide receivers are we targeting to buy on the cheap in Dynasty? Who's a player you have in mind that you know you can buy low right now?
Yeah, I'll say this wide receiver, one of my favorite type of buy lows, because there is a chance we see his value go way up when free agency hits. And this is a guy who's not really valued very highly at the moment because he didn't put up big fantasy numbers. He really hasn't put up huge fantasy numbers in his career, but he's only 26 years old, just turned 26 in November, so he's entering his prime wide receiver years. And really, he hasn't put up big fantasy numbers because he's been stuck in a run-heavy offense with below average quarterback play. But now he's also entering free agency, so the gamble you're taking here is that he ends up in a better situation, an offense that throws the ball more, a more forward-thinking offense, and with better quarterback play. And even though he didn't put up big numbers last year, when you just look at his season as a whole, it's because he missed quite a few games with injury, but he was the wide receiver 30 in terms of points per game, which no, that's not overwhelmingly exciting or anything. But again, in one of the run heaviest offenses with bad quarterback play, if he goes to a better situation with a better quarterback, I could see him cracking the top 24 wide receivers in fantasy, in PPR leagues. And right now, his Dynasty consensus ranking is the wide receiver 49, which means nobody values him highly at all. So really, when you're trading for this player, you're gambling that he goes somewhere better and that you get a guy on the cheap who suddenly becomes much more valuable. I would happily give up a mid to late second or even a third if I could for Jakobi Meyers, because I do think he lands somewhere better and his value does go up.
And I'll tell you what, even if he does stay in New England, but with Matt Patricia gone and Bill O'Brien here at OC now, you know that's going to help. And so we could see him take off even if he does stay with the Patriots. I'm going to go with a very similar receiver, also on one of the most extreme run-heavy offenses in the league, and, well, unfortunately saddled with some difficult quarterback situations and even more so injuries. This is a player who in first 2 seasons has only played a total of 18 games. And we really don't know, just like a lot of things we're unsure about for next season, what the quarterback situation is going to be on this team. Young player, though, could be ready for a year 3 breakout. This is a player who, just given the opportunity, will still be the number 1 guy probably on this team in this receiving core. Has averaged 13.1 yards per reception, which is a pretty robust number, especially considering the type of offense that he's played in. This is somebody who, physically speaking, has a comp of Stephon Diggs. Very similar build, similar type of player, very similar in terms of hands and skills, just hasn't stayed healthy and hasn't really got the opportunity also because of the offensive context. Unlike Stephon Diggs, well, this guy was a first-round pick. This guy is expected to come in and be good right away. I think this is the year it happens. I hope that they can give Rashod Bateman somebody who can just put the ball in his hands. All right, who's someone else you're going to be throwing out trade offers for, but not telling your league mates?
Well, let's go really deep here. And I'm talking consensus Dynasty wide receiver 70 deep. That's essentially free. But he is more than likely going to be his team's wide receiver 2 going into next year. Or at least he is currently. That could obviously change in free agency or in the draft, but it might not. And you're really taking no risk when we're talking about the wide receiver 70. And as a rookie last year, no, he didn't put up huge numbers because he didn't really get a lot of playing time for the first half of the year. But over the last 6 games, in 4 of those games, he went over 50 yards. And that was also, like Jakobi Meyers, with terrible QB play. He has an alpha receiver on the other side of him to help take pressure off. He averaged over 17 yards per catch as a rookie. He has tremendous big play upside, tremendous potential target share in an offense that also could be much better next year because there's a chance they're going to get a quarterback upgrade. But whatever the case, I think anything for a 3rd round pick or later, I would absolutely be willing to take the chance that Rashid Shaheed is the Saints' number 2 wide receiver going into next year, and they get him a better quarterback, and we see a second year I don't want to say a full-on breakout, maybe a mini breakout for Rashid Shaheed.
And that's the best kind of buy low in Dynasty. Someone you can get for almost nothing. Definitely worth it based on his upside. Now here's a buy low that you maybe weren't expecting. A player that you think would be rising in value and especially going to next season. But instead, it looks like it's the opposite because basically 2 straight seasons of very similar numbers. Also some serious injury concerns. So you'd think you'd give him some slack, but people just are now giving up on a player who's just going to be turning 27 years old. That's not exactly ancient for a wide receiver, and still likely to be on one of the top scoring offenses in the league. And here's the other thing. That offense might be losing one of its top targets through free agency. Remains to be seen, but it's possible. Now, you don't realize that even though a player might have come back from an ACL tear and be out there for the majority of the season, they're not really back. It takes a full season. Look at Saquon Barkley. Look at several other cases of players who, even though they were out there, they weren't themselves. It really takes time to get back close to 100%, especially for a player who relies on their speed. So for a guy who's primarily a vertical threat, a deep threat at receiver, someone who can make big plays down the field, I mean, you've got to think that Michael Gallup could get back to what he was. And what he was in the 2 seasons before where he tore his ACL, he was a fantasy wide receiver 3, meaning top 36 ranked. So why not get back to that this coming season? The target share could still be there. The potential, the ability is still there. He will be healthy, and you can get him at this point for probably a 3rd round pick because nobody seems to be interested in him. He's old news. Well, I will take the flyer on him. Now, sometimes these bigger name receivers and guys who put up big seasons, you think you couldn't buy low, but sometimes you still can.
Yeah, and I think you can on this wide receiver because even though he had a nice season and finished as the wide receiver 12 in fantasy last year, people are worried about his outlook going into next season. He's coming off a year where he had over 1,100 receiving yards, had 8 touchdowns, and he plays in one of the league's emerging offenses. This offense is absolutely on the rise, but they added another pass catcher, and now people are worried that this receiver is going to see less targets, he's going to see less production, but I'm not worried at all about him because he primarily plays out of the slot, which means his role is safe, his role is locked in, and that's not going to change next year, even if they add more wide receivers to this offense. He's currently wide receiver 29 in Dynasty, but he's still only 26 years old, so he's entering his prime. I can't believe that this guy isn't up higher in Dynasty rankings, even if he drops off a little bit. We're talking about a top 15, top 20 wide receiver. If I had a late 1st round pick in this year's draft class, I would happily move it for Christian Kirk and just gamble on a guy who I already know is great in fantasy, and is in one of the league's best up-and-coming offenses.
Yeah, heading into last season, we thought maybe he was overpaid and overrated. It turns out he might come into this season underrated. At my last pick, a guy that I'm keeping the faith in. Look, we're talking about buy lows, and this is a player where talent has never been a question. Definitely one of the most talented receivers out there. His reception perception, if you follow Matt Harmon, a guy that definitely trust his data, has said that he's one of the best route runners in the game, or at least he was as a rookie. Well, last year it's really hard to take too much away from because they just didn't throw him the ball. And that's the problem. I don't think the problem at all is with his ability, his talent. That's not the issue. It's just he needs someone who can actually get him the ball, and that definitely might change if the rumors prove to be true. But here's something that did change. So despite the fact that things got so bad that he wanted out and was requesting a trade, they didn't do it. They kept him because they believe in him. You know who they did get rid of? The offensive coordinator, because that was the issue here. And now we got a new OC, potentially a new, maybe Hall of Fame quarterback in town. I mean, this could be the year where we finally see Elijah Moore not let us down, but lift us up to a fantasy championship. Those are the receivers that we're targeting in Dynasty. You want to know some more players that we're secretly buying low on? Go ahead and check this out.